Well, you were on this call with Vice President Mike Pence, who's the head of the President's Coronavirus Task Force, and you challenged them about that, as you just told us. What did he say how did he respond when you raised this issue?
When I asked the question, why is the president trying to foment division in the midst of a global pandemic, I thought my phone had been disconnected. There was stone silence for about 30 seconds. But then he started to basically just give me platitudes about how much respect they have for governors, and I said, this is the opposite of respect. It's disrespectful. And then Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, jumped in and said, Senator Kaine, and said what everybody here is thinking. You shouldn't be urging protesters to hurt their own health by going out and violating these social distancing rules and taking this kind of pro-insurrection policy toward America's governors who are on the front lines trying to solve this problem.
Are you concerned that people will take it even further than that, as opposed to not just protest, but some sort of armed conflict?
Yes. I mean, look, people are showing up with all kinds of arms, and there's all kinds of online traffic from extremist elements. This is not a majority or even a sizable minority of the population, but it doesn't take many to do extremist things. At a minimum, they're endangering their own health. If they're violating these guidelines and going out and being together, you're going to see some people getting sick after this.
So let's talk about the suggestion that you had, that you and your counterpart, Senator Mark Warner, asked the USDA if Virginia could be part of this pilot program. There are 6 states participating. What does this program look like, and has the USDA responded to your request? This, as we said, is to allow SNAP recipients to buy groceries online.
Michelle, yeah, this is a great program. It is a pilot program that was set up in the Farm Bill in 2014, and it's not only to be able to purchase online, but to then purchase from vendors. You think of Walmarts or Amazons who do home delivery or will let you do curbside pickup. And a lot of folks, especially if they're ill, they would want the ability to get groceries delivered or groceries that they could pick up curbside. It's just that the normal SNAP program does not allow that. We're encouraging the USDA to take this pilot. 6 states are already doing it. We want Virginia to be part of it. We've had a good relationship with USDA on requests like this. They haven't yet approved the Virginia request, but we're hopeful that they will in the spirit of other similar actions they've been willing to take.
What is your sense of how significant the food insecurity problem is in your state?
I think it is very, very significant. I know that you're going to talk a little bit about these lines at food banks that are really long, and we're definitely seeing that. We're hearing evidence of folks who have the SNAP benefits. Their benefits run out earlier than they did before. So we're seeing major need. We hope to increase SNAP benefits during this presidentially declared emergency, but at a minimum, a program like this would be a good thing to do.
And before we let you go, Senator, I have to ask you, you said that USDA, you've been working well with them, they've been cooperative. It has been suggested, and the president has been asked about this, that states that have populations that are favorable to him, governors who are of his party, are receiving preferential treatment when it comes to these programs. Has that been your experience?
I have heard reports of that, not in this program, not in the SNAP area, but in some of the business loan programs, I've definitely heard concerns about that expressed from business leaders. But that's why, Michelle, it's really important that the provisions that Congress put into the CARES bill that deal with transparency and oversight be followed. It was interesting that that was the only part of the bill that we passed that when the president signed it, he said he didn't feel obligated to follow it, and then he fired the inspector general that was charged with overseeing the program. So we are really worried about political misuse, especially in the business loan programs.
Okay, but what is Congress willing to do other than be worried about it? Are they willing to undertake any other steps to assure that these programs are being administered fairly?
The House Oversight Committee is already very focused on complaints and concerns about diversions of medical equipment, but also we need to go back and insist that the White House follow the transparency and accountability provisions that we put in the last bill that we did, and I think we need to get a commitment from them that they will do so before we increase the spending on some of these business loan programs.
That is Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat of Virginia. Senator Kaine, thanks so much for talking to us.
Absolutely, Michelle.
One of the effects of this pandemic has been that farmers across the country are having to deal with excess food now that restaurants and schools are closed. In some places, dairy farmers are dumping thousands of gallons of milk, and in some places, vegetable farmers are plowing their harvests under or abandoning them altogether. Meanwhile, there are reports of long lines at food banks and empty grocery store shelves. We wanted to understand why that path from farmer to consumer seems to be breaking down. So we've reached out to Randy Romansky. He is the interim secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Secretary Romansky, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me with you today.
Mr. Secretary, if you're a person who spent your life feeding people, I can think of few worse feelings than having to dump perfectly good food. On the other hand, a lot of people will have had the experience in recent weeks of going to the grocery store and not being able to find what they're looking for. And of course, as we know, many people are lining up for food baskets because they don't have any food at all. So if there's a shortage of certain foods, why are farmers dumping food, or in Wisconsin, milk? What's causing this? Can you explain this as simply as you can?
Well, there's a disruption in the supply and demand of product. So the example you gave on the lead-in is right. With the demand from schools and restaurants being way down, farmers don't have a place for that product to go. The product can't get through the supply chain to be processed, distributed, and go to an end location because there's no place to buy that product, or there are limited places to buy that product, and as a result, it winds up in excess product.
So for example, like you're saying that people who are used to selling their milk to schools, they can't just sell it to grocery stores instead?
There's a production capacity, so milk that goes to schools is typically in smaller cartons or bags, and facilities are set up to handle that kind of processing. It's really difficult to dial in an entire processing line to change from producing that smaller product to be gallons of milk, pounds of cheese, butter, etc.
So yesterday, President Trump announced a $19 billion relief program to help farmers cope with this. The Agriculture Department will start buying meat, vegetables, and milk from farmers, and is supposed to distribute some of the surplus to food banks around the country. Have you heard from the Department of Agriculture about this program, and do you know how it's supposed to work?
In fact, April 1st, Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection sent a letter to Secretary Perdue asking the USDA to do just that, to purchase excess products that were available from farms across the country and distribute it to food banks. So even in advance of the Trump administration announcing this package, Wisconsin, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection developed a partnership with the Hunger Task Force of Wisconsin and the dairy farmers of Wisconsin to make some strides in that direction. I mean, our goal through all of this has been to try to protect that supply chain so that whatever product is being produced can find a home somewhere. And with unemployment in our state going from less than 5% to about 27% in a very short period of time, I'm assuming that they're seeing similar trends in other states. There's a lot of insecurity out there. There's a lot of stress out there. And it's really important that we find a way to link that product back to a final home. And so our agency's been working to connect the dots.
Have those dots been connected yet, though? You're saying this is still a work in progress?
Actually, the fluid milk arrived through the Hunger Task Force that they purchased on Friday. So they are starting to distribute that through their food distribution network. We've had discussions with the agriculture industry and other organizations as well, and we got a report from the dairy farmers of Wisconsin just yesterday that well over 1 million pounds of cheese has already been donated from every corner of the state, and that amount is growing by the day, and this is in advance of any program that would be delivered by the USDA.
That is Randy Romansky. He is the Interim Secretary of Agriculture in Wisconsin. Mr. Secretary, we'd love to keep in touch with you. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the chance to be speaking with you today.
President Trump says governors will decide when to ease coronavirus lockdowns in their states, but he also keeps pushing to restart the U.S. economy as soon as possible. To help guide that effort, the White House announced the formation of what it called Great American Economic Revival Industry Groups, comprised mostly of corporate CEOs and leaders from other sectors like sports and tech from across the country. But there's also a group of so-called thought leaders, which includes Kay Coles James. She is president of the Heritage Foundation. That's an influential conservative research and advocacy group, and she's with us now. Mrs. James, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and it is my pleasure. I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you so much for that. Has the White House given you any direction about how they would specifically like you to serve, like what they hope your role will be as a thought leader?
Well, we have had one conversation with the president, and he spoke only briefly, and then we had the opportunity to share with him our thoughts. We are encouraged to do that. As you know, it's a rather large group. So what I decided to do, even prior to being named to this particular commission, we decided at the Heritage Foundation to form our own commission, bringing together individuals from a broad spectrum of the American population. And those individuals have been working on recommendations which I will then feed into the commission that I serve on for the president.
So what's your North Star when it comes to this? I mean, you obviously have it's a complex problem. I think everyone hopes that people acknowledge that, and you are already seeking the guidance and input of people that you respect across different fields, and you want to convey that. But what's your North Star?
Our North Star is that good public health policy is good economic policy, and we've got to get rid of the or. We have to prioritize getting people back to work, but we can only do that as soon as it's safe enough to do it.
President Trump and the White House issued guidelines on how state economies could reopen, what it could look like in 3 phases. He said the governors will determine when that's safe, but he's also tweeting support for people who protested against stay-at-home orders in some states, people who are showing up at these events armed, not wearing masks, not observing social distancing guidelines. How do you square that?
Well, I don't know that you do, Michelle. I think that that the president is, I cannot speak for him. I do not speak for him. But I think that there's a frustration that he is sort of channeling with individuals who live in certain areas of the country who feel like they are not a hot spot. There are certain things that they should be allowed to do. I also am hearing stories of some governors that are overstepping their bounds, and we're getting questions on a daily basis about religious liberty and whether or not a governor really has the opportunity to shut down, or the power and the authority to shut down a church. So these are dicey issues that have answers that can and will get worked out. I think we're just stress testing our form of government, and I have every confidence that it's going to work well.
I have another question about that, and it speaks to your long-standing role in the conservative movement as a highly visible person in the conservative movement, both inside and outside of government. Some of the states that are pushing to reopen, or who have never shut down, like South Dakota, are also some of the states with the most restrictive measures against abortion, which they consider in the service of life. Now, how is it that states that, if you say that your guiding principle in opposing abortion is to protect vulnerable life, how is it that these states whose public officials say that they are protecting vulnerable life are also unwilling to shut their states down to protect people who are vulnerable for other reasons, people who are immunocompromised, people who may be carrying the virus without knowing that they are doing so? I mean, how is this issue being discussed? How do you understand that within the context of your value system?
I don't, quite frankly. I do believe, as I said, our guiding principle is good public health policy, and I do believe in protecting life in all forms, from conception to death, and I do believe in good public health policy. I think that's probably a question you should ask them, because I'm